AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host, Bar Kelly, brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Alldus podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sparks, and today we are continuing with our ServiceNow series, interviewing some of the best and brightest talent, leaders and executives across the ServiceNow ecosystem. Today we are lucky to host David Yang, Vice President at ICF. David's role at ICF leads the ServiceNow practice for the business. David is passionate about enabling business transformation in the public and private sector. He has held a number of leadership positions in the organization across government, including the Library of Congress. David is an executive in residence at the Ed Snyder Center of Enterprise and Markets in the Robert H. Smith School of Business and University of Maryland. He serves on the board of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Council and the Association of Federal Information Resource Management. He's also a co-host of the Inc.Tank, a podcast featuring insights from leaders in AI, blockchain, data science, and a whole lot more. We definitely recommend you give those guys a listen. Today, David will be talking to us across a number of topics, however, focusing on macro trends in digital transformation for both the public and private sectors, his advice to the C-suite and the customers that he serves, building a winning ServiceNow team, and a bit of a different one, his advice for moving back to an employer, which I'll let him fill in the gaps there a bit later on. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. There's a lot going on there in your intro. You're no stranger to a podcast.
Yeah, it's so impressive when you hear it secondhand.
So, David, let's start by giving our listeners an overview of ICF. Obviously, people may have probably heard of the company, but let's start from there.
Yeah, ICF, and as you alluded to, it's actually my second time there. We were founded in 1969 by former Tuskegee Airmen following the civil unrest in 1968. They had a dream to rebuild the inner cities and to create a venture capital fund to help minority-owned businesses. So ICF actually stands for Inner City Fund. And a lot of people think it stands for International Consulting Firm, which we are now. We're about 8,000 people worldwide. But that central theme of building resilient, safer, more world is always run through all of ICF's culture and the projects we work on. So second time back, glad to be back. I can talk a little bit more later, like you mentioned, about coming back to an employer, but happy to be here.
Definitely, thank you. And so your current role and responsibilities in the organization, fill in the blanks there for us.
Sure. So my official title is I'm the Vice President for Digital Transformation. Unofficially, I basically help manage and grow our platform practices. We have several, ServiceNow being the largest. And so what I do is internally make sure that we hire the best and brightest and they're getting what they need to advance and grow in their careers. And then on the external side, I basically match up those great resources with clients trying to solve some of the world's most complex challenges with platforms.
Obviously, as we alluded to, you've had a career outside of ICF. Part of this podcast talks about mentorship, and we feel the best way to do that is through stories and giving our people an overview of our guests' careers to date. So maybe I'd love to go back a little bit and talk about some of the milestones and key moves you've made in your career.
Yeah, I think much like a lot of folks I know in IT, I didn't start out in IT. I actually got bachelor and master's degrees in graphic design, and this was in the 80s and 90s. Basically spent about 11 or 12 years in that world, in the graphic design, marketing, publishing world. And I would say that while I was in college and then my first few jobs, desktop publishing, starting its advent. So I was one of the first to work on the earliest of the Macintoshes, the earliest of the design suite programs. So it's just naturally transitioned, when the internet started to make its debut around 95, 96 for things like America Online. And so I think I was fortunate enough to have transitioned from the graphic design world to the user interface and web design world. And so I would say that was a major transition that I was fortunate to be part of. I actually joined the government as one of their very first web designers in 1996. Was there to produce some of the very first public-facing websites. Some of
Wow.
them were featured in magazines, USA Today and Martha Stewart Living of all places. Yeah, and then I was a good friend of mine who I went to high school with recruited me to a company called Appian, and I got my first taste of software sales and development there. And Appian is a great company, even though we're talking about ServiceNow, I know they compete. But Appian, I'm still very close with those folks. We have a large Appian practice as well, but I think I was fortunate to be at a company that was a startup, but starting to really hit its stride. Early leaders in the low-code BPM space. Just a great culture, great group of folks, and basically seeing how the sausage was made from the inside when it comes to building a product and all the hard work that goes into it. Went from there to Sapient, which today is still one of the top 2 or 3 companies I've worked for in my career. They basically defined what it means to have a culture and core values that basically is ingrained throughout the entire company. In fact, it was so good that Harvard Business School wrote a case study on it. I was there actually 2 times for Sapient. I was a contractor back in the late 90s, but then joined as an employee in 2005, 2006, and basically Harvard studied how this Sapient was one of the dot-com flyers, but when everything crashed and they were affected too, they were one of the few that came out stronger than ever, and they owed a lot of it to core values. So even to this day, I talk about having been fortunate enough to see how core values truly affects everything from who you hire to how you grow people to the projects you serve to people relationships, and all these great companies I'm talking about, including ICF. I think a good testament is I'm still good friends with all the people that I've worked with at those companies, and I think it has a lot to say about the core values and the culture that those companies have.
Nice.
Yeah, and then in 2001, I happened to be a few miles south of the Pentagon when 9/11 happened and watched it all go down, and something inside me spurred me to action that day, and so I joined the volunteer fire department. Not at first. At first, I wanted to join the military. I was so incensed, but some friends of mine said I was too old at the time, so I ended up joining my local volunteer fire department, and I'm still there today. And I would say that's probably the second or third pillar in my life where I've spent a lot of time and serving with other dedicated, passionate folks. So
That's awesome. Awesome. If you look back over these, but there's a lot there, right? And if you look over those, what are some of the key learns that you've had from these moves, and why have they been pivotal in taking you forward?
I think a lot of them, especially when I talk about like Appian and Sapient, now ICF, the power of people, the power of a company and its core values and never straying from those. I think a lot of it is, some people think it's just fluff, but I've seen it now in so many organizations to where if I walk into an organization and I see a lack of it, I know what the outcome is going to be, whether it be poor delivery or just the survival. You can see it, you can sense it. ITG, the company that I was at before we sold to ICF, all I did was walk in the door and I just realized right away that there's a great culture here. And I just knew that with great talent and that they were so supported, great clients, like the sky's the limit. So I just think the one thing I tell everyone, whether they're starting a business or starting practice, is it's got to be that culture, core values, people first, right? Obviously, people have to be technically capable and you've got to have other certification, things like that. But without that culture, without the people, it's going to be tough. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from those experiences.
Nice. It's interesting. We've obviously interviewed a lot of leaders, and I must admit, when we first started embarking on these podcasts, I was always expecting people to talk about the technology, but people talk about people, processes, and the tech piece really looks after the rest of it if that's in line. So it's really good to hear.
Yeah.
You've navigated the public and the private sectors. Obviously cautious we don't have too broad a sweep with the brush, but what have been some of the differences or trends you've seen, and how's it been transitioning through that? Because we do speak to people on a daily basis who are navigating different sector changes.
My first stint in the government was in the late 90s, and I was very fortunate to be hired by a very progressive IT manager in the legislative branch, one of the best bosses that I've ever worked for, and she understood that the internet was coming. She understood that we had to change our ways, and she gave me a lot of latitude and what I could do. Always had my back because we were really pushing the envelope I don't know if people are familiar with one of the earliest government websites was Thomas. It was basically all the legislative information online, and my team was the one that did that. And so we were really breaking barriers when it came to putting information online, whether it be the technology side or the user accessibility and user interface side, the sharing of data side. We were really on the edge, and she enabled a lot to happen. She had her back. She would advocate for these changes. She was a visionary. She knew it was coming. I would say though the rest of the government was slow to embrace all of that. What I will say is the second time I rejoined the government. It was the same agency asked me to come back. They had started to see the importance of having a digital strategy. This was early 2000s. And I would say it was the beginning of you'll hear a lot of what people say digital services now. And I would say it was one of the earliest forms of a digital services mindset in the federal government to where fast forward today, and I still have a lot of friends who have been in and out of government too. I think it's a great time for federal service. I think a lot of the complaints or hangups people used to say that you can't be innovative, you can't do neat things, you can't learn, can't try out new technologies. That exists in pockets, but I would say for the most part, the government has really embraced new technologies. They have mechanisms for innovation. They're giving younger folks the opportunities that in the past they probably would not have gotten because it was a seniority based sort of way of doing things. But today, I think I would put government up against some of the best private sector firms in terms of having a great career. So I think that's the biggest change I've seen on that side. And on the commercial side, I think they recognize again when we talked about the power of people, right? The power of culture and core values being just as important as your technology and your product. So that's a big change in the companies that we partner with, ServiceNow, Google, Amazon, like they are kindred spirits when it comes to ICF's corporate values. And I don't think we could work with a company that didn't operate in the same way that we do.
Awesome. So we touched on this earlier, and I'm sure it's one that people are itching to hear about. Moving back to an employer that you've worked for before, it's one that maybe some people don't think about. It happens probably more often than people realize, but I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience there. I'm thinking maybe why you did it and some of the learns and how you navigated being I've heard it be called a boomerang candidate.
Yeah, I did it twice. Both times it was planned. When I left the government the first time, they had kept in touch with me. And then in early 2000, they were forming this group. They called it the Office of Strategic Initiatives. And they asked me to come back to lead a digitization efforts. Both times it was planned, and I had a lot of discussions. And then the second time it was obviously the acquisition of ITG by ICF after I left ICF. And I think both times there's an adjustment, right? You have to wonder what fellow employees might think about boomerang. Sometimes there's resentment. Sometimes they almost treat you like you went to another planet and came back and asked you what it's like. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of tell us what it's like on the outside and what did you learn. But I would say both places, one of the key things that they value and that I'm happy to share is taking what I've learned, moving what I did went from a big publicly traded company in ICF to a fast growing startup and then coming back to the mothership, as I call it. This time around, we are the ITG division where I am now. We are truly blending best practices. We are truly infusing what we learn, all the things we did well, we are blending them into all the things that ICF does. I can say when I was at ICF from 2013 to 2017, I saw 4 or 5 other acquisitions. And I would say this time around, ICF said that they would truly embrace a different way of doing things with this acquisition, and 100% they've done it to their benefit. Now it's less of now you're with a larger company, it's more how did you do this and how can we adapt our processes to make this the same way?
Awesome. So, using it to your advantage and diversifying your experience, but bringing that back is brilliant. As you mentioned before, your ServiceNow is a big part of your role and leading that practice. Lots of people be the main customers or partners, and people are navigating building ServiceNow teams. What's your key advice for building and maintaining a ServiceNow team?
So ServiceNow and Appian and all these other platform companies, I view them and I tell my clients, they're like Ferraris, right? They're like high performance vehicles. If you don't know what you're doing, things can go off the rails quickly. If you do know what you're doing, boy, there's not much you can't do with them. So the way I think when you build a practice, again, it goes back to the people. You've got to have really talented, competent resources across the board, whether it be the architects or the developers or even the business analysts. Like it, you just have to have really good people who can deliver, because all it takes is one or two bad eggs and a major transformation project will go off the rails, or clients will spend the money to invest in these big platforms and they won't see any value. And so what we specialize in at ICF is we unlock that value, we unlock the potential, and we do it fast, do it quick. So we're not talking about months and years. Sometimes we're talking weeks to get new product out the door. And that's only possible if you have good people. When I joined ITG, we had 9 ServiceNow people. And they were all great to a person. A couple things happened there. First, we were still too small to scale in terms of tackling the big projects. We were also not very well known in the ecosystem, whether it be on the partner side or just the other larger companies who are looking for talent. I just made it a point that I was going to do some outreach, especially with the company ServiceNow, and let them know that we had a small but very talented group of professionals that could really enhance the value of customers' investments. And all we needed was a chance. And so both on the company side and then in the client space, I would say the same thing. We have this group that's almost like a SEAL team. If you have an issue that you need to solve right now, just tell us what it is and we'll show you how quickly we can move. And so I did those things simultaneously. And in the end, very fortunate to have both clients and ServiceNow take a chance on us, throwing us some of their high priority, high profile projects. And again, back to the people, a real testament to that early group of ServiceNow folks at ITG who just came through, and then they came through every single time. And so that brand builds on itself. And by the way, it's not easy and it's not cheap to do that. Obviously, these people are highly in demand, so we have to take care of them, and the market is so incredibly hot right now for these resources. And so I always say, if you're going to go into these practices, like they're not cheap, they're time intensive, and it's an everyday job to maintain these elite relationships. But if you have that mindset, then yeah, you can build a successful practice. But if you think it's going to be just something like a side job, or it's not something where you're going to throw the entire weight of your company at, or if you feel like you want to mix and match and spread your bets out, it's probably not going to be successful. You've got to really focus, and you got to focus on the things that matter.
Amazing, thank you. And you touched on this before, but zooming out a bit, and I think one of the things we're very interested in is some of the external factors or some of the industry specific drivers for digital transformation change, and obviously ServiceNow plugs into that very well. What are you seeing and hearing from the market, and what's driving this activity we're seeing?
We are seeing increased demand for the platforms. In the case of ServiceNow, I think they have a unique advantage of being in almost every organization already, whether it be in an ITSM standpoint, but they're always in the organization already. And what I think a lot of clients don't realize is they can do so much more than that. Instead of going out and having to purchase another platform or trying to resurrect a legacy system, a lot of times we walk in these organizations that we say, you already have the foundation. You just need to add this, add that, have the right sort of team on top of it, and you can start today with your modernization. The bones are there, and you're ready to go. And so that's something that I think not a lot of people know. They're starting to know, but even ServiceNow and places like Appleton will tell you, there's still the mid-size market that's starting to realize this. There's also on the federal side, state and local markets are just starting to realize this. So there's really a lot of room for growth in this area, the low-code area.
And what advice are you giving your clients to support those trends?
The way we look at it, so at ICF, we have something called the Digital Services Center offering, which is most clients have a hodgepodge of investments. They generally don't have just one or two products or platforms. And what we say is, instead of throwing everything out or saying you're just going to put all your eggs in one basket, leverage what you've got. We take a portfolio approach to modernization. Some things are good for one business use, some things are good for the other. Most of them talk to each other these days. Everything's services based. So what we say is, especially for our clients, sort of the CIOs, we go, if your job is to enable the mission, then take in all their requirements and have a process, which is what we do with our digital services center, and basically run it through what you've got, what is existing, what do you need to buy new, what do you need to upgrade, and make a recommendation that you can deliver to the mission this product in X amount of time with these sort of, we will do trade-offs or alternative analysis saying you can be out the door today on this platform, you might not have everything you want, or you can spend some money and go with this platform, you will have everything you want, it might take a little bit longer. But we say be flexible, right? But for the most part, for the CIO shops, like you are it's customer service, right? You're being a steward of change. You are helping them with their mission. Give them all the options, right? Give them the flexibility to make these kinds of decisions, and then more important than that, just deliver and iterate constantly. And platforms make it really easy to do that, to constantly deliver iterations, to constantly make changes. And so I think when it comes to any kind of application that has rapidly changing business rules or has to adapt on a fly to some kind of external change, we always say platforms or low code are the best way to do that quickly.
And looking at ServiceNow specifically, obviously lots of press around the platform at the moment. It is a dominant player and is evolving. Why, in your opinion, is it positioned to be a dominant player to combat some of the trends and challenges your customers are having?
I think I mentioned the part that they are ubiquitous already. I think the frameworks that they've put in place for things like their App Engine offering, plus change boosts they've made in things like customer service management, they've done a really good job. They too have an innovation team that we work very closely with. They've done a great job. That innovation and products team do a great job of scanning the marketplace for what clients want. So in many ways, they're almost ahead of the curve when it comes to anticipating customer demand. And if there is something they've missed, they have the App Engine to build a custom app in the background. If you look at all their offerings, all their new offerings, where they're going, some of their stuff is also industry specific, transportation based or logistics based. There's a ServiceNow solution or component or combination of modules that can generally solve almost any problem.
And what interesting themes are you seeing across your customers? And I'm specifically thinking about what modules are they bringing to the table and why?
So oftentimes we come in when a client has something in place like service management. Then they want to expand out and say, now that we've got this basic ticketing system that can process requests, you can take that model and apply to just about anything, whether it be an external facing portal to do the same kind of requests that if in the government citizens are making for services, on the commercial side, the same thing. So you almost like just bolt on the pieces. The natural transition is from IT service management to what they call client or customer service management, CSM. That's the one we're seeing a lot of growth in. And then on the App Engine side, they've made significant investments in their UI and UX framework where you can build beautiful user interface experience. You can build beautiful customer experiences now with the platform. You wouldn't even know that you're on ServiceNow. And so they've anticipated that need, and now they compete with the likes of Adobe and other folks who had the monopoly in that space. Like I said, you need talented people to make it work, but there's really no use case that I would say that they couldn't put together a solution. Now, obviously, there's some niche players that are good for very niche situations, and we don't pretend to think that we can recreate some of those products in ServiceNow. In many of those cases, we just recommend go with a niche product. But for about 90% of everything else, I think ServiceNow and other low-code platforms are a good option.
And putting your futurist hat on, where do you see the areas of growth being in ServiceNow? Maybe it's not even that far away, but where do you see them growing towards?
I think as clients start to realize that business processes and the ability to change workflows and then having integrated options. I'll give a good example. So a lot of folks, we start with ITSM, then we move to customer service management, then we fold in things like asset management, hardware management, business management, and next thing you've got a very powerful core set of products that gives you complete visibility and into your enterprise. And with that at the core, it's just a matter of, it's a dashboard approach to making your operation way more efficient. It's a dashboard approach to anticipating trends, to being more responsive when it comes to customer service needs, to do analytics. Once you put all those pieces in place, And we have several clients who have made those moves. They can change on a dime. They can adapt to when COVID hit. Several of our clients were on the platform. We were able to pivot in days to address emergent requirements. And not only that, we were able to measure the effectiveness of those requirements in seconds. That's the
Wow.
power of the platform.
And then I'm sure you've had a fair few of those use cases over the last year. If we go back to your career now, just as we're coming to a close, looking back, what advice would you give to a younger David coming up through this journey again?
I think I could have been more patient. I'll say, don't make
a common
moves.
one, to be honest.
I would say, and I've actually been talking to my children about this recently, is in some people that I mentor, I go, don't make moves or decisions when you're angry. I just say there's some times when I look back and I go, I thought I knew what was going on. I didn't really ask all the right questions. I just assumed this and that was happening, and then I would leave. I would just leave without giving the organization a chance to at least address or respond. I just felt, well, this is not for me anymore, and I would go. That's probably the biggest thing I would say is ask more questions. If there's something, I just gave a talk inside ICF around career progression. I said, if you think you're due a promotion, or if you think you want more responsibility or owed this, just make the case. Back it up with facts, indisputable facts. Advocate for yourself. Don't be shy. Don't be passive aggressive like a younger David. No, the older David was. Like, learn from my mistakes. Be methodical, be communicative, and say, I deserve this, or I want to do that, and this is why. And that's what I would tell. That's what I tell all the people I mentor now is, let's not act in anger. Let's step back. Let's try to look at the whole bit. Let's also be empathetic to what other people and groups are going through before we just jump in and say, this is the case. Because a lot of times you don't know what other people and groups are under. You don't know what your supervisors or managers, the pressures they're under. So these are not like knee-jerk decisions, and so you shouldn't respond in the same way. That's what I would tell a younger Dave.
Thanks for that. No, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it is something that everyone has struggled with. Should they be more bold in asking these things? How should they do it, and doing it in the right way? No, I think that's great. And just as we close, look, this has been great. You've given us so much to think about: industry, ServiceNow specific, your career, some advice. Is there anything you'd like to add before we call it a day?
No, I appreciate this opportunity. I think this area, this market is always changing. I always just say everyone's a beginner, just at a different level. And I value the opportunity to share my experiences. And I listen to the other podcasts. I think more collaboration and information sharing is good for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it. And no, this has been awesome. I'm sure you're giving our listeners a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. For more information, contact mark@alldus.com. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.